in Denver. The date is August 5th, 2007, and I'm speaking to
Ann Keys Thomas, wife of Sam T. Thomas, who was in I-87, 10th Mountain Division, World War II.
And Ann has some stories that her husband wanted to relay, but became too emotional to tell himself. So Ann's going to tell us the stories.
The first little incident that is a humorous one was when he was inducted into the military as a 16-year-old. With the day he was 16, of course, you had to register for the mandatory draft. A few weeks later, he took the ASTP, the Army Specialized Services test, the test to be a member of the ASTP because he didn't want to take a biology test. He didn't really know what the recruiter was talking about, but he hadn't studied for the biology test, and he could make it up if he contributed to the military effort by taking this test to see if he might have the intelligence to be in the ASTP forces. He passed the test, really forgot about it, but you had to volunteer one day before your 18th birthday. January 10, 19, I guess would have been 40, anyway, one day before his birthday, he volunteered, and then his father was to take him to Camp Robinson, Little Rock, for his physical. And he being an only child, the father took him to, his dad took him for his physical. And being an only child who had never been away from home before, it was a very, very cold day in January. His dad followed him all through this area for the physical. The big shock was he had never undressed before in public, and here he was walking around nude for his physical, his father following him with an overcoat, putting it around his shoulders as they moved from one typical station to another, until one of the officers came over and asked his dad, "Are you escorting a prisoner?" Because at that time, men could volunteer and get out of prison by going, and they thought his father, being very protective of him, was overseeing a released prisoner. And he thought that was a humorous detail to add. After he was overseas and on the USS Roosevelt overseas, there were two men that he seemed to gravitate toward. Ted Miller, who became the cook for I-87 and sold rings to the men, ironed shirts, never took leave with any of them. Some of them didn't like him very much because they thought he was making money off of them. But he was rather a mentor for my husband. Also, the men loved him because he always got up, regardless of what was going on, 3:30 or 4, and made them fresh donuts, even when they were getting ready to come home. Before they departed, he got up early and made them fresh donuts. Another mentor for him was Russo Perkins, my husband was a company runner and assigned to headquarters. Russo is, I believe, about 92. My husband was not yet at that time 19, and Russo more or less helped him, told him what to do, and he felt was more or less of a protective figure for him. And they remained friends through the years. The Ted Miller saved all of his money that he made from ironing shirts, selling rings, doing whatever, to the men in the unit or the division, and saved his money and said if he lived, he would use this money to buy property in Florida and develop an amusement park. He did. He became a millionaire, and all through the years until his demise, he donated tremendous amounts of money back to the 10th Mountain always paid for the 87th Regimental dinners totally, because he said he earned his money from the soldiers. He wanted to give it back to the 10th Mountain Foundation. Another man that my husband wanted tribute to, still living in Portland, Oregon, but wasn't physically able to come, Frank Ranello. And when they were marching to the Po Valley, my husband has a size 14 and a half shoe, AA, and the Army at first couldn't have any shoes for him, and he had to wear civilian shoes and often got KP because he was not in regulation shoes. But they finally got him some size 14 and a half, and at the Po Valley, when they were going through the minefield, his foot was in the air, and Mr. Ranello yelled, "Don't put that size 14 down, keep it in the air, man, you're dead." My husband moved back, and that saved his life. He was in the fighting at the base of Belvedere as the runner, and hid in a concrete bunker, concrete basement of a house that had been demolished in the daytime, but would go out at night. As they were going up Belvedere, he passed out with pneumonia and didn't know where he was till he was in a field hospital. The man who took his place was killed within the first 15 minutes. And when we've been able to go back, of course, that's always the place he places his memorial. Then another, those men he wanted to have tribute. Then another funny incident, as a returning veteran at 20, we were going to get married, and I was in school in Texas. We lived in Arkansas, but because we were having our church wedding at Texas Women's University, he had to go to Texarkana side or the Texas side to get our marriage license. He wasn't old enough to get married without his father's signature. He went out of the courthouse. He told him he'd get the signature, and he was incensed. As a veteran coming back, our generation grew up in a hurry, and he felt he was old enough to make that decision. So he walked around the courthouse, came back with his father's signature, and got the marriage license. We had the formal church wedding, and it was all legal until we found when our daughter was 15 and our son 11, we weren't legally married in the sight of the U.S. government for Social Security purposes. At that time, about 12 to 14 years after World War II, it came to light that a number of women had married a number of soldiers for their insurance, and they were getting multiple Social Securities. And there was a search, and many couples were found that they stopped. This was to stop the Social Security fraud that was going on. How ours was discovered, I have no idea, but we were notified that we were not married and could not get Social Security benefits for our children. We protested and didn't think we should have to be married again. I was teaching school, but we checked with several lawyers, and they told us it would be less expensive to get a marriage license and be remarried. So on our wedding anniversary, a chaplain who'd been an Army chaplain said, "Come by, I'll just sign those papers for you." We went by his house on our anniversary, and he said, "You needn't think I'll forge them again. We'll have the ceremony over again. You probably don't remember what you said, and besides, you're old enough to get married now." And so we walked to a chapel, pulled off our wedding rings, and happened to have our best man and maid of honor with us. So 15 years later, in the eyes of the U.S. government, our veteran was old enough to get married. And he wanted that as a fun story, he thought. And the last part, as civilians, Arkansas and Little Magnolia, Arkansas, a town in southwest part of the state, was a concentration camp for conscientious objectors during all the early years of the war. There were a large number of them housed in barracks, much like Army barracks, and they were assigned to do all sorts of work all in the area. On our farm, they built a pond, they did different things, but they were despised by the local people. And a tornado came through and demolished that camp and all of the trees around it, and nothing else in a 50-mile radius was touched. The next morning after the tornado, half of the men had walked 2 miles to the draft office and volunteered. The other half were transported to other concentration camps. It was rebuilt and became a prisoner of war camp for the Germans, and for a number of months the German prisoners of war were housed in Magnolia, Arkansas. They were received, they were young men doing just what ours were overseas. The community accepted them with open arms and felt sorry for them. And our preachers asked that you invite these, they were invited to come to church services, and they were asked to participate. And the families, then we were asked to take them home and give them meals like you hope that our men overseas are being treated. And they were there until then, of course, they were released to go home after the war. There was also a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Arkansas that started with the when they began impounding Japanese persons, and they were there until after the close of VJ Day. And he just wanted those notes of history recorded.